Welcome back to Goldmark TV. We have a bumper edition for you today. 4 different things we'll be looking at. Later on in the programme, I'm going to be taking a look at these beautiful circus pictures by Maurice Kestelman, a really fantastic artist who you might not know. My colleague Kate will be looking at some beautiful prints by Antoni Clavé, and later we will take a look at the fantastic tall bottles of Nic Collins in preparation for his upcoming exhibition. But first off, Mike Goldmark, the boss, is going to be talking you through a fantastic new Antoni Gross project that we're just beginning. I hope you enjoy today.
We've long championed the work of Antoni Gross. Gross died in 1984, and it wasn't long after that we had our first exhibition in the gallery, and we've been selling his work ever since. And many of you will know that we are now delighted to be able to represent the estate. Gross was multi-talented, painter in oils and watercolours, official war artist. There are more of his war paintings in the Imperial War Museum than any other artist, book illustrator, filmmaker, and above all, I think, often referred to as the doyen of British etchers, great printmaker. In 1953, for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, some 36 artists were asked through the Royal College to make lithographs of celebration of the coronation. They were produced in very small editions, some 50 portfolios, and the Antoni Gross one is very scarce and extremely difficult to find. So, with permission of the estate, we have made this print in our own atelier. This is Gross's print for the coronation. This wonderful print appears in the catalogue raisonné of Antoni Gross. They've actually printed this one in colour. And here we have it, Gross at his whimsical best. This wonderful illustration of Hampstead Heath, extraordinary number of things to look at. Here, this lady waving the flag for the coronation. The print bears the Goldmark Atelier blind stamp, and here we've got the Antoni Gross estate stamp. There's a lifetime of looking in this print, a number of things that are going on here. Girl with her balloon that says "Long live Eliz," and this one wearing a "Kiss Me Quick" hat. All sorts of, there's a roundabout going on there. All the fun of the fair on Hampstead Heath. I don't think one would ever tire of this. This beautiful print comes framed and delivered, and I think represents remarkable value.
Maurice Kestelman might not be a name that you know, but if you've seen any of his abstract paintings from the latter half of his career, you would find it difficult to recognise some of these wonderful portraits of circus goers and performers from this early stage in his artistic career. Kestelman was one of a great many first and second generation Jewish Eastern European immigrants to come to Britain and work in London in the first half of the 20th century. Among them, Mark Gertler, David Bomberg, and Joseph Herman from Poland, and people like Horace Brodsky, Bernard Meninsky from Ukraine. As Jewish emigres escaping from the persecution of their home countries, often they fostered a sense of community. These were often creative people, artists, writers, sculptors and painters, and it was from this very community that Maurice Kestelman emerged. In 1922, Maurice Kestelman took a scholarship at the Central School of Art. That was the same school that he would return to as the head of painting and teach for more than 20 years in the latter half of his career, almost certainly to the detriment of his success as a commercial artist. It was also here that he first met Bernard Meninsky, who was his senior, a tutor who would then become a very good lifelong friend. Meninsky was quite unlike Kestelman. Kestelman, the more younger, the more liberal and socialite. Meninsky, much sterner, sort of conservative with a small c, and very exacting in his standards. Both men drew profoundly on the art of the French Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, and particularly the sort of Cézannesque palette of dusky oranges and greens, and the wonderful lilacs and sort of pale pastel colours that you can see in this painting of two girls watching the fireworks. That use of colour in bringing out shades, and also this impressionistic brushwork that you can see on these two faces here. When, however, Kestelman as a young man said that he wanted to escape to the south of France, to the French Riviera, and explore the same areas that had so enthused those French painters, Meninsky warned him that he was in danger of becoming seduced by the dangers of the place and becoming a flaneur. Kestelman ignored his older tutor's protestations, and he left straight for the Kang-hyo and a studio where Chaim Soutine, another Jewish immigrant artist, had spent his time painting in the south of France. Kestelman was struck by two very different kinds of painting when he discovered the south of France and the beautiful countryside and the people there. He found two schools of thought, one that sort of idealised, that gave you a beautiful wash of colour in the old Impressionist style, and one that made a very brutal realisation of the world around him, like Soutine, whose studio he was staying in, the kind of grotesquification that Soutine embodied. Kestelman's early style sort of sought a middle ground, a very broad Europeanism, which you can see in this painting of two girls in a crowd watching the circus. You can see the influence of this French school of painting and these green shadows across their faces and these beautiful lilacs in a number of the shadows around them. On his return to England, Kestelman continued his training at the Royal College of Art. And it was here that he was really first introduced to the world of stage and design. He became a set designer and worked on a number of quite prominent productions, including Carmen at Sadler's Wells and a fantastic production of Richard III at the Old Vic with Laurence Olivier in the title role, one of Olivier's most famous wartime performances. But it was also during this time, during the late 1930s, that Kestelman was afforded the most important commission of his early career, to illustrate a book on the circus. Noel Carrington was the commissioning editor for this new circus book. He was then head of publishing at Country Life Books, and 2 years later he would start the Puffin Books series, which drew on inspiration from USSR-produced children's books and their sort of colourful themes, bringing that Soviet-European connection full circle. At the time, Kestelman was his chosen illustrator, and he spent a lot of time going to numerous performances of the Bertram Mills Circus. This was at the time when the Mills Circus was at its height, the very height of its popularity and its fame. Mills was lauded as chief among the British ringmasters for raising the profile of the circus, for raising its celebrity as a genre, and for getting patronage from Edward VIII, who was going to be future king and then the Duke of Windsor. Kestelman attended these performances just a year before Mills died from pneumonia, at the very height of the circus's popularity. And he drew on his experience of the bright lights, the colour, the fantastic whirling motion of acrobats and clowns. In the end, the book was never published. The advent of the Second World War put an end to it. But in the run-up to that preparation, Kestelman has spent a long time making sketches of the clowns, the acrobats, the equestrians of the circus, often in these bright, chalky pastels like I've got here before me. Like Toulouse-Lautrec before him, Kestelman was just as drawn to the performers behind the scenes, waiting in the wings, as he was the performance under the bright lights. And it's some of these portraits of the performers just before they go onto stage or practicing within the big top that are among some of his strongest. Away from the floodlights, these performers are bathed in this really beautiful moonlit enchantment, this glow of sort of lilacs and purples and blues. And then once you get to the performers, the acrobats on their high wires, you get this wonderful burst of light, these bright chalky colours here that light up, they illuminate the cavernous gloom of the big top circus. Kestelman's daughter, Sarah, would have been about 4 or 5 when these pastels were made, after the war, when the circus returned and the horses that had been sent off to the battlefronts were back to relearn their performing tricks. She went on to become a very established, very celebrated Shakespearean actress, and I wonder if some of her love for the stage might have come from accompanying her father on trips to see the circus as he made sketches like this. This little portrait of a clown is one of my favourites of the Kestelman that we have here. And I love that this performer of farce and of comedy has been given this really beautiful, quite sort of eminent portrait. It's almost ministerial, like a sort of Whitehall portrait painting that you might find in the study of some politician, with these lovely rouged cheeks and this monocle and cap. Kestelman was far from the only artist of the 20th century to be drawn to the circus and its themes. It was a favourite of people like Chagall, another Jewish émigré, who found a love, a kind of magic realism in its whirling performers, in the lights and the colours. But it also, for artists of Jewish heritage, it was of a particular connection that they found with the circus. Circus people were by their nature outsiders. They were operating on the periphery of towns, on the go. Their identity was not bound up in geography as nomads. It was bound up in the stories they told, the sense of costume, the rituals, the performances. I think a lot of Jewish artists saw the fraternity that they had among them mirrored in the fraternity in the performers in the circus. Many of these Jewish artists had come from families that had been driven out by the pogroms in Poland, or the strictures of the Pale of Settlement in Russia, that area of Western Russia where Jews were allowed to live and outside of which Jewish citizens were forbidden from entering the country. I think they saw a kind of spiritual home in the circus, a sense of unity and collective. And for Kestelman, as someone who must have felt at times like an outsider in his own country as a second-generation immigrant, his choice of subjects, not just in the circus but in later life, in the peasant girls, the fishermen, people living on the outsides, on the outskirts of society, I think the circus must have really resonated for him, and it really feeds into these very beautiful, very moving, very poignant portraits of a fantastic world of colour and charm.
Recently, while going through our plan chests, and we have many plan chests here, I was actually going through the sea drawer. I was looking for a piece of work that we'd sold. Sea drawer is one of my favourite drawers because it has work in it by Chagall, Henry Cliff, George Chapman, all these wonderful artists, painters, printmakers. But I also came across work by Antoni Clavé. Now I like Clavé's work very much, but as an artist I don't really know very much about him, so I thought it's a good opportunity to read up on him. And also when I looked, I noticed that these two pieces aren't on our website that I want to talk about today, so I thought I'll show them here today. Clavé, as an artist, he was born in 1913 in Barcelona. He's about 30 years younger than Picasso. At the age of 13 and seeking employment because he had to work, he was hired as an assistant in a textile shop, and they made corsets and girdles. And it was during his time there that he also enrolled in Barcelona's School of Fine Art. Another job, which I think is quite important too, that he had as a young man, was he was an apprentice as a painter and decorator. So he was using mediums and like glues and distempers and paints, and he was mixing paints and colours, and applying them onto different surfaces. And I think that's quite important when we look at his work, and particularly his later prints. He also had the habit of collecting strange objects, unusual objects, anything that caught his eye. As he gets older, he becomes one of Spain's best known and celebrated artists. He's known for painting, he's known for drawing, he's known for sculpture, and he's known for printmaking. But he's also known for costume design as well, and it was for that he was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for the work that he did on the 1952 Hans Christian Andersen film. His work over the years has changed dramatically. Originally, his work, I'd say, had a Baroque ornamental kind of style to it, and then he sort of moved through different phases until he became very abstract. But today, particularly, it's his printmaking that I want to talk about, and in particular the 2 prints that I've got up here on the easel. Clavé is the type of artist who, if he's going to work in a medium, he wants to understand it, and to understand printmaking you have to make lithographs or etchings, but you have to learn what the medium can do. You have to learn the technical aspects of it as well. So it wasn't enough for Clavé just to take his ideas, drawings and designs to a lithography studio and say, okay, can you transfer these on and make them into lithographs? For him, he actually wanted to learn the process, and that's what he did. So from 1939 right up until 1965, he learnt lithography, and that's all he made when he was making prints. He didn't want to reinvent them, he wanted to experiment with them so he could really push the boundaries of what they could do and how he could express himself in his own work, how he could be creative with the medium. And it was later on, it wasn't until 1965 when another artist and a friend said to him, you know, why don't you look at etching, because it's got some fantastic possibilities. So he then went on to learn etching, and again he learned every element of etching. So he learned etching, he learned aqua tinting, and then he learned what you can also do with an etching plate by adding things on like carborundum. You can give texture to the etching plate, and it was very, very experimental and always pushing what the plate could do and how he could incorporate that into his work. And it's particularly these 2 pieces that I think that we can see that in. So you've got this lovely example here of embossing which is going on in this etching. We've got bits of, it looks like printed material because I can see some text going on over here. This looks like it could be cotton or string, or this looks like a piece of linen, something like that. All of these things have been brought together to make this piece of work. Now it does have a title. It's got a lovely French title which I can't pronounce, but translates to the bottle, which obviously you can see that here. But we've also got all of this. This is etching. This is sort of etching into the plate with line and that as well. So he's really mixing these all these different aspects of etching in together. And I think for him too, as an artist, he felt that his printmaking was equally as important as painting. You know, when you're painting, you learn about your paints, your canvas, your surfaces, the application of the medium to the surface, and he values printmaking in exactly the same way. He doesn't see a difference, and craftsmanship is incredibly important to him. And I think that's why he wanted to learn these processes rather than just taking ideas to a studio. So when I was finding out about Antoni Clavé, I was able to use this wonderful reference book that we have in our library. It's got some fantastic pieces of work in it, and it's also got that one. There you are. There are some original lithographs in this as well. I think there are 3. It's a beautiful book, really hard to get hold of, but it was really interesting to read and a pleasure to look through. This is the second one of the 2 etchings that we're going to look at today, and they're both etchings, they both have aqua tint in them as well, and this is the aqua tinted area here. So if I just gently drag my nail over it, you can actually feel the texture in that. So it's the ink is really pushed into this paper, and it gives this lovely texture. We've also got embossing going on, we've got lettering, lots and lots of different things in here. Both of them are, I think one is 1968 and one is 1969. So this is sort of 3 years on from him learning the etching and aqua tinting process. They are really small editions, they're only 85 each. They're quite big pieces, and Clavé, I think, used to like to work as big as his press would allow him. He kind of liked the big scale, probably from earlier work having to be quite tiny. Well, I've enjoyed bringing these 2 etchings to your attention today. I think they are beautifully printed. There's so many elements in here with line and texture and tone. There's subtle colour upon colour. I'm not sure if you can pick that up, but they are really 2 magnificent examples of his work. Thanks.
You might just be able to make out behind me the jungle of new Nic Collins pots that arrived last week. They are sitting ready for preparation for our upcoming exhibition that will be happening this July. There's a huge variety in the work that Nic has made for us, over 350 pots for this exhibition. But today I thought we'd look at these tall bottles, which have become something of a signature in Nic's output, and a wonderful form for showing off the effects of his anagama kiln. Nic is at heart a storyteller. All of his pots, at their very essence, are telling their own little stories about their place within the kiln and the 4 or 5 day firing that they've undergone. The extreme atmosphere of his anagama kiln, the temperatures of in excess of 1300 degrees, and the carefully watched execution of the firing, which includes all sorts of side stoking and checking the path of the flame. That goes right back to the very stacking of the kiln, which Nic does very artfully and not without a little risk too. If Nic's pots are stories about wood firing, then these giant tall bottles, which you can see around me, have one hell of a story. That story starts on the wheel, and these tall bottles are thrown in their entirety on the wheel. That's quite the feat when you see just how tall they are, how narrow they are. This is also done on a momentum wheel, a kick wheel that Nic built himself. So the care and consideration and the technique that's put into getting a wonderful bottle like this awesome sculptural form, managing to get wet clay to stand and defy gravity is quite a feat. They're thrown in parts and finished right up to the neck and the top of the bottle on the wheel. These are then, when they've dried and they've been glazed, they are then put in the kiln, and they're often stacked right underneath the stoking holes in Nick's kiln. In fact, all of these bottles have been beneath the stoking holes, apart from this slightly smaller one, and you can see the variety, the change in the surface compared to this beautiful chino and its very sort of smooth blushing, and the wonderful shawls of ash that these other bottles are wearing round their shoulders. Because they are long, because they are tall, they make for a fantastic way of capturing the effects of the ash. So this underside that you can see, and these shell marks, is where this tall bottle has been lying on its belly beneath the side stake. But if I just rotate it round, you can see the colour change hugely from that wonderful orange that's been protected in from the ash to this incredible mixture of browns and purples and sage greens from the ash that's dripped over the side from the embers that have accumulated on top of the pot as they've stoked through the firing. What this means is that these bottles are put in an incredibly dangerous position. Depending on the size of the pieces of wood that Nic has to stoke with, sometimes if they're a little smaller, these pieces of wood can bounce around in the kiln before they incinerate, and they will knock over pots. They can either smash pots straight away, or they can knock them over so that they fall on top of each other and fuse together. And that's something that you often see with these larger forms like these tall bottles. Often they'll come away with other pots stuck to them. So it's really the survivors that make it, and that have made it to this exhibition. They're also put in a space where there's incredibly intense reduction. So you can see on the surface of this pot some of these beautiful dark spots. These are iron spots that have, from iron in the clay that's come out as the firing has taken place. And they give it this wonderful mottled texture that mixes with these sort of little bits of feldspar and other minerals that have come out, and you get these little white and black spots across the surface of the pot. Nic has spoken about how his pottery sort of occupies a grey space in the world of ceramics. Between usual studio ceramics and fine art, wood firing has a kind of peculiar place within that. These very sculptural bottles are sort of the perfect example of that grey space, that very strong and creative space where Nic says that he's almost painting with the fire. He's imagining the path of the flame through these and around these bottles and these other pots, how it's going to weave and affect the different pressures and temperatures that are going to take place within the kiln as that temperature is built up slowly over a period of time. And often the climax of the firing, the last sort of big push at the top temperatures, that's when some of the fantastic effects are going to take place. It's also when a firing is determined either as a success or a failure, and sometimes pushing just that little bit harder can turn what would otherwise make a very dull and unsuccessful firing into a magnificent one. These pots are really the perfect representation of that. They've got a wonderful story to them, a wonderful sense of motion in these two different sides that you get, the protected side and the side that's been heavily ashed. And combined with the beautiful chino glaze that Nic makes, but also the tomoka glaze, which we can see on these two pots either side of me here, something we've not seen quite so much of, but really adds a completely different spectrum of colours, of sheens and wonderful purples that mix with these sort of emeralds and sapphires that you get from the natural ash in the embers. It's a really beautiful way of making the most of a quite limited palette, and really letting Nic's voice as a potter and the voice of the fire come together in a really beautiful way. I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of these tall bottles. As with everything else in this show, these are all now available for you to come and see, for you to come and explore. Do please book in with us at the pot department. You can reach them at pots@goldmarkart.com. You should now be able to see the first set of pots from Nic's show coming online. There are yet more to arrive, so if you've seen anything that you like the look of, do please get in touch. And I hope that you enjoy more of these pots from this exhibition as it comes online.